Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, there's been so much new information, just information that we didn't hear while this case of Bryan Kohberger was supposed to go to trial. And I think the disappointment in everyone almost is that so many things would have come out in a trial that we're not really hearing about now, because we're not going to hear from witnesses. We're not going to hear about witness statements. We're not going to hear about investigators, detectives that would testify to what they saw, what they heard, who they interviewed, what they said to them. So all of those things are things that are sort of coming out now in dribs and drabs. I don't know if that's a New York word or not, but a little bit here, a little bit there. But one of the things that we want to know also, we realize that Bryan Kohberger, you see on this thumbnail, inside the mind of a monster. And he absolutely is a monster. How did he go from a PhD student to a permanent wearer of this orange jumpsuit that he'll be wearing for the rest of his life? How did he get to that level? Why was he studying serial killers? And not from an academic perspective, but from this perspective that he wanted to become one, that he wanted to become a serial killer. Great interest and his searches on the computer of really horrific things that could happen to women. And he studied them and he searched them. And now, as we find more and more evidence from the people from Cellbrite who did the work on his phones, I believe their names were Heather and Jared Barnhart, we're finding out some really interesting things, as well as we are from photographs from his apartment in Pullman, Washington, and other evidence. And to my surprise, that his home, his apartment in Washington, they recovered pretty much zero usable forensic evidence. That is bizarre. But yes, he had 4 to 6 weeks to clean it up, didn't he? So, but he was able to clean it up where there was no usable forensic evidence that tied him to the murders at 1122 King Road. So we're going to take a look at a lot of those things tonight. And until that, hold on to your hats, hold on to your seats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your service dog. We're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
Joining me tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant Professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, good evening. Thank you for having me on. Good to see you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to bring him right straight out of Brooklyn, retired NYPD detective, and straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Bill.
Hey,
Thank you for having me.
Good to see
You're not going to forget my name that quickly, are you?
No, try not to.
All right. Folks, the NFL season is just about to start. It's about to start tomorrow night. And FanDuel is a sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. Football season is finally here. Have you checked out the latest odds, futures, and win totals on FanDuel Sportsbook? Think the Bills are headed to the Super Bowl? You can lock in your bets today. Whatever your game, FanDuel Sportsbook delivers the latest lines, futures, and specials so you can join in on all the action. I'm eyeing college football. Who's your pick for the Heisman? Plus, I'm loading up on parlays and player props like Saquon Barkley, breaking his own single-season rushing record. With the Major League Baseball postseason right around the corner, FanDuel has you covered with player specials and unique props. Whatever your game, FanDuel Sportsbook delivers the latest lines, futures, and specials so you can join in on all of the action. FanDuel, the new sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. Folks, if you like this show, it really helps us. If you like, comment, share, and subscribe. That'll be the last little commercial I do for a while. Mike, we're finding out so many different things. And one of the things that I'm a little bit amiss about is that the investigators that actually worked this case haven't told us a lot. And I'm going to put up the lieutenant from the Idaho State Police, Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson, and the police chief, Anthony Dollinger. And when they speak to CNN, this happened on July 25th, they're really sort of like tight-lipped, even talking at this late juncture to CNN. Phil, what do you make out of that?
Billy, it seems that there's some evasiveness with regard to the statements that are being made by the investigators. And specifically when we talked about it before we went on the air, with regard to injuries that weren't consistent with the knife, they kind of left it out there when the reporter asked a question whether or not they believed there was a second weapon. They kind of left it out there, and we had reason to believe it could have been from the butt of the K-bar knife, some of those injuries, and they didn't really address that. So I don't know if it's got to do with politics. I don't know if it's got to be just trying to be tight-lipped. Perhaps they have a set of facts that they want to talk about, and there's a set of facts that they don't want to talk about for maybe a political reason. I don't know, but it did come off to me, and I don't think the reporter pressed so much with regard to those injuries. I don't know. The case is over. Bryan Kohberger will never see the light of day. And I think that talking about, the facts of the case, there should be more openness with regard to that. I really feel that there was some type of, holding back a little bit, I guess. And I understand that when you have an active case or a case that hasn't gone to trial yet, you don't want to talk too much about the facts of the case. Believe me, I get that part of it. But now we know that the case is over. He's never going to see the light of day. He's sentenced. He pled guilty. And there really is no reason not to divulge. I mean, maybe some personal things with regard to the victims, but facts of the case, I think that there's no reason to not divulge those things to the public.
Mike, same question, really. Why do you think that the lieutenant from the state police and the chief of the Moscow police are being so sort of coy and still protected? And I find it amazing, like, it almost seems like they're still trying to hide things, but the case is over. He pled guilty. He's in prison for the rest of his life. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, at this point, after you've done an amazing investigation, got tremendously excellent incriminating evidence against Bryan Kohberger, you would think that the police would want to tell the reporters out there, look how much we accomplished. We went from standing start on November 22nd, November 13th, 2022 to when we arrested him in Pennsylvania. This was a great case. It was 6 weeks. It was an amazing case. We put together a fantastic task force with the FBI, the Idaho State Police, the local police. Everybody worked together. It was 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And look at our work product. We're proud of this. We did a fabulous job. They're not doing that, which leads me to figure out that when they answer questions, they don't really give a lot in their answer. And I think that's because they don't want follow-up questions. It's like if they answer a question, yes, no, shake their head, whatever happens to be, the most minimum that they can do, they want it to die. They don't want a reporter asking a follow-up question, another follow-up question, because every time you answer a question, it spurs something on the reporter's imagination. Ask another thing. I think they just want this case, to me, I think they want this case to die. Maybe it's for political reasons, maybe it's for economic reasons with the university, but they just want this case to just be buried as quickly as they can do it. And I think that's why they're very reticent to really engage in a lot of banter with the reporters.
This is the interview that happened on July 25th with CNN with a reporter named Jean Caceres. I'm going to play a little bit of this to get the idea what she's talking
You
about.
collected numerous devices, but you collected an active phone that he had. What did you find on that phone?
Well, the phone, it just provided us and matched up everything that we mostly already had. You know, we'd already conducted search warrants and had a lot of his activity, a lot of his phone usage. So when we actually had the physical phone and we were able to do the extract of it, you know, we didn't gain a lot from it. You know, we know that he was clearing a lot of his devices and wiping things from them. We know that he used VPNs. So, but we also did find screenshots and pictures of news coverage of Moscow.
On the case.
Correct.
That's
Yes.
so classic.
Right.
It has been said that there were pictures on his phone of groups of young people in Moscow, and that Maddie, possibly Kaylee, were in some of those photos. Is there any truth to that?
No truth at all. There was not, to this date, we have never found a single connection, anything.
Right there, I just want to say something. Right there, that's not true. All right. Because how about the single connection of him doing 23 recons to 1122 King Road? There's a connection right there. So how is he saying we didn't find a single connection?
Right.
Well, why is he not telling the truth, Phil? Why?
Bill, 23 times in a close proximity to 1122 King Road in the weeks before, pre the homicide, multiple homicide, the quadruple homicide. I would say that definitely shows that he was stalking the victims. He was in the area 23, and it wasn't like he was in the area during normal business hours during the day. It was late at night. When he was lurking around, apparently, you know, so saying that there's no connection, I'm not buying that. And we know that the Mad Greek restaurant, their Wi-Fi, he was picked up on that on 2 occasions. So, and that's a connection where both of the girls worked. I don't know how he can make that statement. It just doesn't fly with me. And Bill, I'm so glad that you pointed that out. 23 times in a close proximity to 1122 King Road, predating the murder. So, I mean, what was he doing? You know, I mean, he had no apparent reason to be there. And, you know, stargazing in the middle of the night. Well, he was stargazing miles and miles from where he lived and in the area of 1122 King Road.
Tail from the chat, I think he meant Facebook, etc. Tail, I don't care what he meant. He wasn't telling the truth. You know, I would love to have Scott Rouse on to watch that when he said that, because how did you forget that there was 23 recons to 1122 King Road? How did you conveniently forget that? Because your narrative is that there was no connection. And I think that is absolute bullshit, Mike. Your thoughts?
Yeah. When they're talking about the phone and that company, Cellbrite, they gave you so much information on what was on his phone, because perhaps they don't have a political agenda and they are proud of the work they did on behalf of the FBI, looking at his laptop, looking at his cell phone, seeing all the messages, the pictures, the emails, the text messages, all that stuff. They feel very free to talk about it, and it bolsters their image. This person here, this lieutenant, perhaps he's not aware. Maybe he really was just an administrator signing things. Maybe he really wasn't an active part in the investigation. And maybe he doesn't really know all that was taken from that cell phone, all the information. But even if he does know it, he's not going to suggest it. He's not going to say, well, we don't see any evidence that there was a picture of any of the girls or a text message or an email. However, there is other connections between his cell phone and those girls. 23 times circling the area. He won't volunteer information. You got to pry it out of him. It's incredible. And I think it has to do with politics behind the scene. They just want this to die. That's all they want to do. They just want to pro forma. We'll answer your questions and please go. Please go. We don't
You
want
know,
any searching questions.
Tail from the chat, he wrote, I think you misunderstood what he was referring to. I don't think I did.
No?
I think he was trying to put it all to sleep in one
Yes.
swift denial. And
That's right.
the fact that there were no pictures that related them on his phone, okay, but there were other things, and we're talking about a digital instrument, a cell phone, which in most homicides in this day and age is one of the most important pieces of evidence in an investigation. So I want to go back to this because
Why don't you back it up a little bit? We'll listen to it again just for the hell of it to see what.
There's some really good stuff coming up. That's
Okay,
why.
good.
Between any of the 4 victims or the other 2 surviving roommates with him. No pictures, no texts, there was rumor, speculation that he was following some of them on different social media sites. There was sites that were sent to us of, hey, this is him, he's following. They were either untrue or they were sites that people made that were completely fake. And so we had to research and go into every single one of those just to prove or debunk what somebody had made up and of course, then that spread to the media and it went wild that he was following or there was a connection and there wasn't. We wanted that, I think naturally we need that, what's the connection? What's the why? And we have found zero, never any connection.
I saw the amount of search warrants that you applied for and got returns on, and I don't think we saw the returns, but the work you were doing was monumental going through everything, and I saw that in the documents. Back at the house, we have now learned, because documents that have not been public have now been made public, and Xana Kernodle found on the floor over 50 stab wounds, much of them defensive. Can you explain that? Put that into layman's terms, the wounds and the defensive aspect of them.
She fought back, and she fought hard. And that's unless Darren can expand on that, that's primarily the reason.
Yeah, that was.
It's like pulling. You could see they don't want to tell you anything. I mean, the lieutenant is sitting there like, yeah, and the chief. This isn't really his venue. He's a chief. He's not supposed to be really involved deeply in this investigation. Oh yeah, I mean, she fought hard. Obviously, she was stabbed 50 times. Could you maybe elaborate? Defense wounds. Where were the defense wounds? Did it show that the weapon used was a K-bar knife? Is that what it appeared to be? But based on the size of the wounds, they're not offering anything. This reporter has to actually pull this information out of both of them.
So Xana absolutely fought. And we know that Xana was up. We know that Xana had just gotten her DoorDash shortly before this and was actively up. And so, yeah, she did. She fought.
So as she fought back, he kept stabbing.
The fight just continued. Yes.
Kaylee, in the documents that just became public, there was a preliminary autopsy report that said she was stabbed over 20 times. Mr. Gonsalves said, and we haven't seen the final autopsy, but he has said she was stabbed, Kaylee, over 30 times. Do you know the amount of times she was stabbed?
We do. We know the exact amount of times that every one of them was stabbed. And it's not something that we would speak about for the privacy of the families. And but I can tell you we've met with families, and his information that he has is very accurate.
Well, we know because of the public documents, her face was unrecognizable. And then the concept of, okay, a second weapon, where do you stand on that to set the record straight?
Yeah, we believe that there was one primary weapon. The same knife was used to kill all 4. As has been reported, and I think the family has spoke to this, Kaylee was struck in the face, and we don't know what caused the marks that were left by it.
I want to take him off the screen with that. They don't know what caused that. I suggested, and Phil suggested, this is a K-bar knife. Do you see the handle where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 round intrusions in the handle? If she was hit with that, the butt end of that knife, it could have created wounds like we haven't been privy to know the autopsy report of what actually they think made those wounds. But wouldn't that have been suggested, Phil, that it could have been the butt part of this knife? Because
Billy,
he's not saying that.
I think those circular objects on the handle are bands that hold the wood handle onto the K-bar knife itself. And I think a simple answer would have been that, yes, there were wounds on Kaylee's face that we believe could be, doesn't have to say definitely, could be consistent with that of the handle of the K-bar knife. He didn't even go there. He just says, we think there's one weapon, which I was okay with. He was in the right ball field there. And then he kind of leaves it open that, there was these other wounds on her face, and we don't know how they were made. Now, all he had to do was just, mend the two things together, saying it's possible that these wounds were made by the handle of the knife. Of course, they could be consistent based on those circular patterns that are on the handle of the knife. We know that there were circular marks on her face from the autopsy report. So it would have been very easy to mend those two things together. And I think that it by not answering that way, you leave the door opens for these wild conspiracies. Well, there was more than one weapon. That could mean there were 2 killers. There were 3 killers, So all the conspiracy theories start. I think one of the problems probably, Bill, and I think you were starting to hit on it, the lead investigator and his partner should have been the ones that were given this information, along with, let's say, a lieutenant or a chief standing by to be part of the interview. But when you have someone that's just on the outside, peripheral, a supervisor and he's not even a sergeant or a lieutenant, it's a chief now that maybe just oversaw the whole thing. He's not going to have that specific kind of detail because he may not have gone to the autopsy. He may not have spoken with the medical examiner on the discussion of these marks that were on her face. So that's why I think we got lost in the woods a little bit. We went into the weeds a little bit with this interview, and it's just really not practical, because what it does, again, I'll repeat what I said. It opens the door to these conspiracy theories.
One of the things is, and you're right, Phil, but when a detective, I'll just give an example, an NYPD detective catches a homicide, and in a case like this, a quadruple homicide, the detective is required by NYPD Detective Bureau rules to attend the autopsy, to watch the entire autopsy, to interview the pathologist, to talk in depth to the pathologist. So that's who we really should have sitting here, the detective that was the case detective, because the lieutenant from the state police, I believe his name is Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson. He knows the case, but it's not his case. The detective who has the case in name, it's his case, is going to know this case in tremendous depth because he would have read every single piece of paperwork with this. He had interviewed pretty much every single person involved in this case, but lived and breathed this case for the 2.5 years before it was supposed to go to trial. I would have loved to have had the actual investigators tell us, because usually detectives also aren't involved in the political bullshit with a case. They're going to tell you, they're going to tell you the way it is. I sense a tremendous amount of politics with the answers we're getting from these two.
Bill, I'm so glad you brought that up, that NYPD detectives are required to go to the autopsy of a homicide victim. And these are the questions. And if I was the investigator and I, was physically viewing the victim's body, that would be one of the first questions I'd be asking. There's all these stab wounds. What do you think are the marks that are on the victim's face? And now we know from, right from the jump that it was a K-bar knife because of the sheet being left behind. I would have that information and I would ask the medical examiner, could it be that these marks were made by this specific weapon? Because by that time, you may even have, all you had to do was put it into your phone and you can come up with what a K-bar knife looks like. And, you can do a quick comparison right there at the autopsy, which was probably the next morning. And I'm sure it was done. It was probably done. And what you said, Billy, a detective who worked the case, probably him and his partner, would know an answer to a question like that. And I think the reporter could have really maybe pushed back a little bit more on that and said, be a little more specific, but it went the way it went.
Absolutely. Tracy Knight, she doesn't believe we're that smart. Anyone have your report card that you could send her? I can't believe you guys are retired police officers. You're not very bright, in my opinion. It doesn't take a genius to see all the lies and corruption in this case, but then that explains why you believe the mainstream media.
Oh, I don't believe the mainstream.
I don't believe in the mainstream media. We've been picking them apart.
Yeah.
Right. What we're doing is we know the way an investigation is supposed to go, and we're pointing out the politics and what we think is politics. And one of the biggest things that we think is politics is the stranglehold that the University of Idaho had on this investigation. And I still believe that to this day. Mike, your thoughts?
Bill, it all comes down to money. And if anybody says it's not about the money, it's about the money. And when you have that house, 1122 King Road, and it's sitting there and kids are coming in with their parents to take a look at the campus and, seeing where they want to go to college, and they walk past a house that people know what has happened, it's a terrible reminder. And the kids may decide, I'm uneasy going to college where 1 block away from the campus, 4 people were slaughtered. Like, does Jack the Ripper live in this neighborhood? I can't do this, Mom and Dad. It's a terrible, and they remember, it's the state university, they get funding from the state based on per capita, how many kids attend. The more kids that attend, the more money they get. So it makes sense for them to tear the house down and to get rid of it and just wipe it away like it was never there. It makes a lot of sense for very quickly, within like 48 hours, for Bill Thompson to accept the plea bargain request of Ann Taylor. Get it over with. Again, it's about the money. Get this behind everybody. It's all about the money. So the three of us are very cynical people. We don't believe that there was no politics involved. We know about police corruption. We know about police incompetency. We know more about that than anybody because we had to work in the NYPD. We've seen what police departments can do, what happens occasionally. But in this case, you had 2 outside agencies besides the Moscow police. You had the Idaho State Police, you had the FBI, and they're really professional. They know what they're doing. So this was a really well-run investigation. And the reason why we think that they're not bragging about it is they just want it to die.
I think you're right. Latisse from the chat, thank you for the $4.99 super sticker. Sergeant, I want to see the body cam from his arrest and what he said to the officers who took him in. Well, the FBI were the ones along, I would imagine the Moscow police were there with them, but they're the ones that executed the warrant on the house. They're the ones that conducted surveillance, saw him cleaning his car for, at 4 o'clock in the morning, throwing his garbage into the neighbor's garbage pail, all of those things. And then when he did get arrested, he started asking the police why he was being arrested. And I believe when they finally said to him, well, it has something to do with the 4 people murdered in Idaho, all of a sudden he said, I think that I need an attorney, right? So right there, and I'm not saying that because he asked for an attorney, that means he's guilty. But look, there's a lot of people that have followed this case that still don't believe he's guilty, even after he pled guilty. Yeah. Trust me, no one pleads guilty to do life without parole unless they are guilty.
Well, all you have to do is ask the question to yourself. Would you plead guilty to killing 4 people and take a sentence of going to jail for the rest of your life without the possibility of ever being released if you didn't do it? And the answer, I think 100% of the time, is no, I wouldn't do that. So all you have to do is ask yourself that question. And listen, with regard to the video or the body cam video when he's arrested, I'm sure if you know the history or you know the psychology of a psychopath, he's going to maintain a facade of normality. Oh, what is this about? You know, that's what they do. They don't feel emotion. Bryan Kohberger exhibited all of these traits. He didn't feel much emotion. And, you know, there was obviously, if you could really dig deep into his personal life, there was probably red flags associated with that type of behavior. But it wouldn't be surprising to me at all to see that video and see him putting on a facade of normality.
Yeah. Jane C. Tracy Knight is likely a bot, because that was a ridiculously ignorant comment. Jane C. Thank you. Thanks for coming to our defense, though we're used to a lot of these bots. We're used to a lot of these stupid comments. You know, I read not all the comments, but lots of them. And when I still have people saying he's innocent, the police flaked him, you know, he didn't do this. He had help. This was a cartel house. You know, this was a drug, you know, all the ridiculous stuff. The DNA was planted. The knife sheath was planted. No one knew who put the knife sheath, you know, all of these ridiculous things. Anyway, the 2 of investigators that we're hearing about now are Jared and Heather Barnhart, who are digital experts from Cellbrite. I'm going to play a little bit. They were on Antoinette Levy's show.
Digging into the information, what do you find?
Well, that was the hard part. I expected, I remember saying to Jared, we're going to go in there. We're going to find the motive. We're going to be able to tell these families why. We're going to understand how this crime occurred. And there was so much information that just wasn't there. That was shocking. And that's when I started to panic a bit and saying, you know what? I'm going to use Celebrate Inspector. The FBI granted me a license to use Magnet Axiom, which is a competitor of Celebrate. I used open source tools. It was almost a desperate chase to find data that was erased.
Mm. And how hard is that to find data that is erased? Because it can be done.
Well, it depends on how it was deleted. So on a computer, if you drag something to the recycle bin, or if you do shift delete, that information can be recovered for a set period of time. If it's in a database on a computer, it can be recovered for a set period of time until it's purged. But when it's purged, depending on how it's overwritten, it can really be gone. And there are tools out there that will overwrite the data, so it is unrecoverable.
Mm-hmm. So we hear, you know, in the news, we've heard in the past about programs, software, you know, bleach bit, if you will. And I'm not saying that was used in this case, but we did hear that there was some high-end software, if you will, that Bryan Kohberger was using to, you know, quote unquote, wipe his devices. Is that true, Jared? Is that what was going on?
No. And again, just speaking to the 2 devices that we participated in, if there was something on something else, maybe that's true, but that's not true for what we did.
Really?
Yeah. So for the Android phone, if you think of it more of not some fancy wiping software, but the user making decisions to dumb down connectivity and make his device less fruitful. Ultimately, he used incognito mode in Google Chrome to try to sort of obscure the records that could be recorded about his web history. You can manually go in and just clean things up, clear my history, like things like that. With some time, they do actually delete. But he turned off his Wi-Fi. And so making his device not able to look out there and beacon and talk to networks that he might have been near. He used NordVPN, which in and of itself, it's benign. It's not something that is necessarily a nefarious thing. Security conscious people use VPNs all the time. Sometimes people use VPNs to stream stuff from somewhere else in the world just for fun. But as you start to build this profile of all of the behaviors that he did, especially around the time of the crime, he set up his device to be dumb, minimally collecting data. And so as we started to tackle the evidence from the Android, it wasn't what's here, but very obviously what's not here, and then hyper focusing on the minutes and hours before and after this void of time where his phone was powered off in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, he physically, the prosecutor has said this, it didn't go into airplane mode. It didn't, the battery didn't die. He physically pushed this button, the power button, and turned off his phone the night of the murders.
Correct. I got lucky that I had the exact same test phone, make, model, Android version, AT&T network, like everything aligned perfectly. That I said to Jared, we have his exact phone. So we would replicate exactly what we found. So we would find these log files. We work with a really smart person, Josh Hickman, who is an Android expert. And we would reach out to Josh and say, do you know what this log is? What does this mean? So we recreated, not only did he physically power it off, he turned off Wi-Fi 2 days prior to the murder. He powered off his phone. It was at 100% battery. We're going to testify with 100% certainty that's what he did.
Why would he turn off Wi-Fi 2 days before the homicides? What does that mean? What does that say to you as a digital forensics investigator?
I would guess he didn't want to be detected. He knows Wi-Fi scanning happens, and we don't know. We didn't have fruitful location artifacts on his device because time to evidence matters, and Jared can dive more into that. But if he did pre-GI runs or showed that he wasn't connected to his home anymore, because sometimes these phones not only show what you're connected to, but if his alibi was that he was at home, it wasn't. It was he was stargazing. But Wi-Fi is huge in putting you at a location. So he knew that, and he wanted to prevent that.
Yeah, a lot of times choosing to press the button to turn off Wi-Fi, to me, that was preparation. That was him doing an action that he thought would help him get away with it. But what it ultimately does is it creates logging of the fact that he did that thing, and then now we're talking about it because he did that. Had he just left it on, it may have done something, but it may not have also.
So I think that's really interesting because they talk about what it means, the fact that he turned off his Wi-Fi, the fact that he turned off his phone, the fact that after the murders, he didn't turn his phone back on for, I think, an hour and a half. So all those things, when they go back months and see, did he ever turn his phone off before, like 3 or 4 months before or 5 months? No, he never had. So evidentiary, this is huge, Mike.
Oh, absolutely. And not only does he do something totally different than he's done previously since he's gotten the phone, when he turns it off, he's driving out of Pullman, Washington, and he's seen on surveillance cameras at the university right around the same time. He's driving by. He's like, click. So you've got him leaving the university, turning off the phone right around the same time. He's gone from like 3 o'clock or 3:30 or 3:20, and he doesn't turn it back on till like 5:30 in the morning. And where is he at 5:30? He's driving into the university, and click, it comes back on. It's a beautiful thing when that he did that, because it shows to me consciousness of guilt. It's a very significant act of turning it off, physically turning it off, and for a period of time, which gives him exactly the amount of time to drive there and come back. And then he turns it on. That timing matches up almost perfect with the video footage. And that is consciousness of guilt. That's very significant.
Absolutely. Mark McKinley from the chat, would you have pled guilty to a life sentence or go to trial and face the death penalty? Well, Mark, I don't really think that was all his choice. I think his attorney, Ann Taylor, went up to him and said, listen, you're cooked. Your ass is cooked. And you want to roll the dice and face the death penalty because there's 6 shooters in Idaho from the firing squad that can't wait to pull that trigger. Or I think as a professional attorney, defense attorney, you should plead guilty because you're going to get found guilty after trial. I believe that's what she said to him. And that is why he pled guilty, not because he was afraid, well, he wasn't afraid. There are people, they'll face life in prison, but when you talk about the needle or the firing squad, they want no part of that. And in that way, all the anti-death penalty people are wrong. It is a deterrent. 2 cases in a row, we saw a guilty plea because of the threat of the death penalty. And this, Bryan Kohberger was one, BK, and Stefan Stearns was the other one. Look how fast he pled guilty. He wanted no part of the needle. So in that way, yes, it is a deterrent. Phil.
Yeah. Excuse me. With regard to that statement that Mark McKinley just made, if he was referring to what I said, what I was saying was, if you're innocent of killing 4 people, would you plead guilty to it? And I think the answer I said was 100% no, that you wouldn't. But the reason, and Bill, I think you touched on it right there, that he probably went with the life without the possibility of parole is because he was seeking notoriety. This is a form of control for him. If he faces the death penalty, there's no more notoriety once he's dead. So in his psychopath mind, he wanted to continue on, maintain this notoriety. It's in his mind, it's a form of control. And the whole, as we had a psychologist on in the past that talked about it, this whole thing was basically about control. I mean, he probably experienced rejection in, attempting to have relationships with the opposite sex, which manifested into this obviously psychotic and homicidal behavior. But the bottom line is that if he's faced with the death penalty, he's going to lose. His lawyer told him, you're going to lose this case, and you're going to be facing a second phase, which is going to be the death penalty phase. So maybe it's time to make a deal, and that's what they did. And I think the motivation on his end was notoriety and a form of control.
Absolutely. Dana Hodgkin, these pro-burgers don't believe BK is innocent. They just love to fight for criminals. The only thing you can do is ignore them. Don't acknowledge them at all. You know something? We learned something in the police academy called hooking your child. And when someone wants to hook your child, like you act like a child when someone does something, like when you get really mad, aren't you acting like a child sort of? Because you really shouldn't let yourself get that mad, because once you get really mad, you've blown the whole argument. You really have. So you sort of have to keep your cool. So
that was taught in the first couple of days in the police academy.
Yeah, but Phil, I just wanted to make a point. Needless to say, I still get my child hooked all the time.
It's not something that you can easily overcome. But
no, it's not. So,
in a professional.
So I still have that little child. I have that little child in me that gets hooked, that gets mad. So I will admit to that, and that's what that's all about. Jane C. from the chat, Jim Clementi said turning his phone off was very significant forensically. Jane, you're 100% correct. I'm glad you brought that up. We love Jim Clementi, retired FBI agent. Kimberly, hi, Bill, Mike, and Phil. Love you guys. Thank you, Bill. I love your police background. I know how much you worked on it. It's fabulous. Kimberly, thank you so much. Every once in a while, it's good to have some fans that like us. I shouldn't say that. A lot of people like us, but there's also a lot of people that don't like us, But, I always say that expression, too. We're cops. We're supposed to have a thicker skin. That's what we were told also from day one, Mark McKinley, he pled guilty because the state had enough evidence on him. Mark, 100% right. He pled guilty because he didn't want to face that firing squad, even though it could have taken 20 years or 25 years to get the firing squad, but he didn't even want to face that. Because most killers, if not all, are cowards. He's a coward, right? He had no problem taking the lives of 4 innocent students, but now his life, no, don't take my life. Don't you dare take my life. Folks, Police Off the Cuff is now sponsored by FanDuel. And I'd just like to remind everyone that this Thursday night is opening night for the NFL season, and the Philadelphia Eagles will be facing the Dallas Cowboys in the first game of the season. So if you have checked out the latest odds, futures, and win totals on FanDuel Sportsbook, think the Bills are headed to the Super Bowl, you can lock in your bets today. Whatever your game, FanDuel Sportsbook delivers the latest lines, futures, and specials so you can join in on all the action. FanDuel, the sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. I wanted to show next. I want to show some of the new pictures that they've come up with that have just been recently released, and it shows BK's apartment. Let me put this up on the screen.
Photos come after Kohberger pled guilty just 2 months ago to the quadruple homicides known as the Idaho Four. Criminal justice books were also found in Kohberger's residence, and that doesn't come as much of a surprise since we know he was working on getting his PhD in criminology. But what is stunning here is a book on sexual victimization of women on college campuses. We still don't know his motives for killing Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. But the more photos are released of his personal quarters, it does raise suspicion of why he targeted the young women specifically in their college house. Joining me now, News Nation's Bryan Enton on the development, who, as you know, has been following this so closely. All right, Bryan, what stood out to you in the photos? I mean, when I first opened the file, it's close to 700 pictures. It was a lot to get through.
Yeah, I think it's 699 photos. What stood out to me the most were the photos inside his apartment, which is in Pullman, Washington, where he was going to Washington State University to get his PhD in criminology. And if we kind of cycle through some of the photos here, we've never seen inside the apartment up until now. You can see it's very barren, kind of depressing looking. This is the living room. You can see he's got like a TV stand. What's interesting is on the TV stand, though, are these greeting cards that are apparently from family members. It was his birthday, and these greeting cards came after the murders, which is sort of strange to think about. Here, someone refers to him as Bryan. And then this seems to be a card from his mom that says, "A son never leaves your home, leaves your home, but you never leaves your heart." So there were greeting cards there. This is also the kitchen. Everything was very, very clean for the most part. The bathroom, remember the just creepy selfie that he took Laura after the murders. There were some hairs they found in the apartment that I had heard about, which this backs up. They have evidence markers showing the hairs. This is the bedroom here. Laura, again, just very barren. He has a computer there. And there's actually another hair that they found. I think it was on his bedspread. There it is right there. You can see another evidence marker. These hairs never ended up actually connecting back to the murders. You'll remember they found very little in his apartment in terms of anything that connected back to the murders. This is his office at Washington State University in the basement of the Criminal Justice Building. I'd never seen inside before. There's just a desk. You showed photos of the whiteboard. And I was just thinking back, there were these police reports. Many of his colleagues that he worked with at WSU said that they were creeped out even going in his office because they found him to be so creepy. Remember, he made fellow students cry. And then there's the whiteboard again. There's something that they blacked out on the whiteboard, which kind of left me wondering what that was. But again, this is our first look into his home, and then also into his office there at the university.
So when we look at some of these pictures, right? It really, I think it says something about him. And people, when we talked about this the other day, Mike, people were like, "Oh, if you don't decorate your apartment nicely, what? You're a creep." So I thought of my dorm room at Buffalo State College back in, I won't tell you the year, and it probably looked just like Kohberger's. I wasn't a big decorator, I was just like, I had a picture on the wall or maybe a calendar, and it was like, "Oh my God, your room looks terrible." But when I look at his and knowing what I know about him, it makes me think he is a little bit or a lot bit creepy. Mike.
Yeah, Bill. I for one am very streamlined. I'm not a junk collector, so I do have some sympathy in a way. I can't complain about the way his room looks, because if I was a single man a bachelor living on my own, I think my apartment would look like his living room. And I say that with all humility, but it is kind of strange. What I found the most interesting thing is he did leave some books there. He did leave some personal things like the cards, and he did leave some clothes in the closet. So it appears, and I always opine, that when he left in December and took that cross-country trip with his dad, he probably knew he was never going back. He probably didn't want to go back. My opinion was he probably wanted to stay 2,000 miles away in Pennsylvania, in the mountains over there, and be nowhere near that place. Why would he want to go back with his white Hyundai, and why would he do that? But it does appear that he actually was left a few things there and was actually planning on going back, which really surprised me. The cards and things like that, you would have thrown them out if you were not going to return. But it is creepy in the fact that we know that he's the killer of 4 beautiful young people, and that, to me, in the way I decorate, that's the one part of it that creeps me out, is the fact that he did kill those 4, knowing I'm standing in the middle of a living room of a guy who killed 4 people.
Phil, for some reason, I don't see you as a sparse apartment guy. I would see more decorations coming out of you and more.
There we go. Cannolis on the wall.
And I just think, I would say, you could tell this is Phil's place, whereas, with me, I'd have the sparse walls and the sparsity of everything and be like, who the hell lives here? But it does tell us something about it. I want to play a little. Bobby Chacon went on Anganette Levy, I think it was last night. He speaks about this, and it's funny. Cops and people in law enforcement, we speak and think the same, because he said right away, I see it very Spartan. That was the first word I said, Mike, wasn't it? When we talked about Kohberger's
that's the word. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. So here's Bobby Chacon.
Talk about these new photos that we're seeing inside of Bryan Kohberger's apartment. I want to bring in Bobby Chacon. He's a retired FBI agent, also an attorney. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. What strikes you first when you look through these photos of Bryan Kohberger's apartment?
Well, I think how Spartan it was, how little personality, if you will, was. I mean, there was a few maybe kind of birthday cards or greeting cards, but very few. Nothing on the walls, which, on one hand, I know that, I've lived the undergraduate life in a dorm, and he was in graduate student housing, which, is always a little, lower end. It usually comes furnished with cheap furniture and not a lot, in way of aesthetics. But a lot of times you personalize it yourself, even a little house plant or something. And this was nothing. It was nothing there. Now, granted, these pictures are taken, he had time to kind of clean out things and get rid of things. And, but I was really struck by just how sparse it was, how, there was nothing personal. There just seemed to be no personality. We know now about the personality type and stuff, and it just seemed to fit this person who didn't have any friends, didn't have any social life. There was just nothing there. It was just books, which were used in his studies, and maybe 1 or 2 greeting cards, one from his mom, maybe. But that's it. It was very, very sparse.
Yeah, very, very sparse. I mean, not a photograph of anybody. For as close as he was, apparently, we know from talking to Celebrate digital experts, they examined his phone. His mother and father were his 2 main points of contact in his life. He started his day talking to them. He texted them throughout the day. They tucked him in at night, basically via phone. Not even a photo of mom and dad, anywhere, siblings, anything. Nothing personal at all. I think that his attorneys would say, well, he has level 1 autism. Maybe it's a function of that. I would say this is somebody who lived in his own head based on what we know. He lived a fantasy life in his own head, fantasizing about what he was going to do based on what we know from his Google searches about non-consensual pornography, the dressing up like this Ted Bundy-esque character, I guess, from this show he watched on YouTube. I mean, wouldn't you say that's probably a little more accurate?
Yeah, the only photograph that I saw that kind of looked kind of lived in, if you that kind of term, was his desk with his computer and his bed right next to it. It wasn't even a very fancy bed or anything. It was just he lived his life looking at that computer and then going to bed. It was the only area of the house that, I'm not going to say it looked normal, but it looked like somebody lived there. The rest of it That place could have been abandoned months ago. It didn't look like anybody lived there in months.
So watching this, and Mike, we spoke about this the other night. Phil, what do you think this says about him? The decor in his apartment, or does it say nothing?
Oh, I think it says a lot, because now I didn't go to college, but I'm thinking back to when I was single and I had my first apartment, and there were telltale signs of what was going on with my friends. His birthday had just passed, so maybe a friend or a girlfriend got a card or balloons. None of that was there. I mean, we did a lot of drinking in them days when I was single, so there was no signs of any of that, of partying. So I think what we saw a profile of exactly what was going on in his life, which wasn't very much. He was kind of secluded. He was introverted. And I think that Bobby Chacon kind of pointed out that it seems like the only point of life in that apartment was that computer, that he lived on that computer, probably doing searches and research for his criminology courses and all of that. And then there's a lot of things that are missing from his cell phone and his computer that were wiped out. Perhaps it could be some of the trail of the victims in this case, the stalking of them. So there's a lot of different things that we can allude to, but I think that apartment, the way that it's laid out, I think that's kind of a profile of exactly what was going on in his life. There were no signs of life in that apartment. I mean, when I had my apartment, my friends would come over, we would do our pre-drinking at the apartment. It doesn't appear that any of that was going on in his life. So again, my apartment, I made my bed every day. I always had a neat bed, and it wasn't really decorated like you said, Bill, earlier, but it was kind of simple. But you have to think about what the mindset is of a 20-something-year-old person that's a graduate student in college.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, it does show, and I will say, for as much as I want to joke about my own decorating tastes, that resemble a hotel room, but there's not a single. Now, he was planning on returning. You would think that if there might be a picture of his girlfriend there somewhere, a picture of him with his buddy playing football, sitting there somewhere, a picture of his mom and dad, and maybe his two sisters, just something to remind yourself of your family. He's about 2,500 miles away on the opposite coast, 3 different time zones. And you'd think you'd like to have just something, maybe not a poster on the wall, but just some pictures to remind you, here's my family, I love my family, and I miss my family, and just something. But yeah, the fact that, and Phil pointed out, the fact that there's absolutely not a single thing that looks like it was purchased or made or has any sort of personality to it is a little bit frightening. It is a little bit off-putting. And I think, Phil, you're right. All he did, maybe with his OCD, I don't know, but all he did was be on the computer and think about stuff and write stuff. And he was living in, Angelina Levy said it right, living in his head. That's where he was. He probably, from the time he got there, and there was maybe 1 or 2 times where he maybe went out to his social. I think there was a pool party at one point thrown by somebody. After that, he probably did not go to a bar and have a beer and listen to some good music. He probably didn't go watch a football game at a bar. We know he probably didn't go on any dates. He didn't go maybe drink on a Friday night with a couple of the other PhD students, because you tend to form a small little clique of people and help each other mutually trying to get through that program. No, that does show that he really was only in his head, and he blocked out the rest of the outside world.
Some of the things, and I know that Phil and Mike, you were both on the show, or maybe it was actually, we had 2 shows about this motive being a psychosexual attack. Mm-hmm. And the first guest we had was Dr. Joni Johnston, a forensic psychologist from the West Coast. And look, none of us, myself, Phil, or Mike, are experts on the psychological end of this, but we've seen enough to recognize it. And Dr. Joni, she definitely gave her rubber stamp of approval that she felt we were on the right track, that this was, yes, in fact, a psychosexual murder. And I don't know him well. I've seen him on other shows, and I have a lot of respect for him. Dr. Gary Brancato, who was on the Interview Room a lot. He did a show, and we never watched it, but apparently on that same exact topic, that this was a psychosexual murder. And then we had retired FBI agent Jim Clemente, who was the chief writer for the Criminal Minds TV show, as well as being an attorney and one of the best profilers the FBI has ever had. And he 100% agreed with us. So I'm comfortable to say, based on those three giants in the industry, that this motive was a psychosexual motive in this case. Phil.
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, I have to agree with you, Billy. And I think that if we look into the history of BK, I don't want to say his name. I said it twice already by mistake. If we look into his background and his history, we will see some of the traits that Jim Clemente pointed out. And we do believe that there was definitely a social component to it, that he was unable to socialize with the opposite sex. And I think that we also discussed that the incel part of the whole thing, that involuntarily being celibate, this manifested within him. I think he got on the track of being a homicidal maniac when he started to study serial killers, when he became a criminology student. He went into the life and the mind of serial killers. And I think he made the decision that that's where he was going to become famous, and he was going to have control over the victims in that house, or a victim. I don't think he intended to kill all four that night. He probably went after at least one or two. However, he encountered the others, and he wound up committing a quadruple homicide. But I am certain that it was a psychosexual motive. And I think that had he not been arrested in court, that he was going to do it again.
California privacy rights. I don't know if you're pulling my leg or not, but obviously when we say this is psychosexually motivated, he wanted sex. That's why he targeted females. He never expected Ethan Chapin to be there. So yeah, that's what this was about. Jane C. 163-214 also researched tactics about how killers have enhanced their pleasure during murders, such as gagging. Yes, Jane, all of that stuff was there. And I don't think there wasn't that much talk by the investigators or by a lot of the talking heads that killing someone with a knife is also very up close and personal. And this also could lend credence to saying, yes, this was a psychosexually motivated murders. I want to play this. This is the body cam from the police as they arrived on the scene of 1122 King Road. They're going up the stairs for those that are just listening to this and don't have the video.
And I didn't text him yet, but I'm 313.
This is the police body cam. It's a lot of blacked out right now.
I don't know if I'm still in here or not. I really just came like that. Is it like 1370?
But they're blocking out a lot of the graphic content, but get an idea of what the apartment looks like.
Okay. Nobody's allowed to leave for now. Okay. Just stay here for me, please. Police department.
All the students out on the front of the house, Dylan Mortensen. So this is a little confusing to watch because they're blacking out a lot of it. But this is the first time that they showed the police body cam video, and you see the students that called it in. And remember, this has got to be around 12 noonish. They didn't call this thing in till very, very late. And that's another thing that baffled many of us as to why it took so long to call the police. Mike?
Yeah, Bill, many people, they roasted Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk about this. And that was terrible, the things that they said about those girls. But the thing is, you can't understand how you would react until you've been in a similar situation of absolute stark terror. And if you're an adult, you're going to see it very differently than it happens to you if you're like an 18 or 19-year-old young man or young woman. They were scared out of their minds, and they were scared. And sometimes people get so scared, they can't perform a positive action. They just curl up into a ball. She ran, Dylan Mortensen ran to Bethany Funk's room, and they locked the door. They didn't know exactly what had happened. They knew that, but they thought something terrible had happened. And all they wanted was the assurance from their roommates that they were texting that everything was okay. They were so freaked out, they didn't have the ability to do anything positive, like counter the threat, because of how they felt. Me personally, I don't see anything wrong with what they did. I don't see anything odd with what they did. I think I understand what they did and why they did what they did. But for them, I feel so bad, because when you look at the end of that video and that officer or that paramedic walks out and they're standing there, they must be realizing there's no ambulances getting their friends, putting them in the back of the ambulance and driving them off with an IV in them. They know, seeing that paramedic come out, there's nobody alive in there. There's no need to rush now. They're just sitting there. Nobody can leave. You have to stay here. We're going to be talking to you. At that point, the complete 100% horror of everything that they felt and were scared about actually did happen. And that to me, that's the saddest part of this whole tape, is seeing them there at the door waiting for somebody to come out and say something.
Absolutely. I want to play a little of Banfield right here.
I have to take a quick break right now, but there's so much more of this ahead. Lots and lots of these documents. Like next, never before seen interviews with the surviving roommates and friends, and with a former roommate who never felt safe in that house. And one of the roommates answers some questions that we've been asking about that morning after. And we also have exclusive reporting about a text message that Kohberger's mom sent him right after the murders, mentioning the murders and, quote, that girl, one of those girls in the coffee shop. The experts who found it on the killer's phone join me live when we come back. Why she was spared that night, even though Kohberger saw her and knew that she saw him. The interviewing officer writes this, and I quote, "She does not believe anyone ever tried to open her door during the time he was in the house, and he could easily have done so. She volunteered that to come through the sliding glass door, the person would have had to scale a tall wall. She advised the suspect would have known her room would have been occupied because he appeared to have known the layout of the house. She also said it could have been someone who was in the house last year when other girls were living in the house." Dylan took a lot of undeserved abuse online from trolls. I hope you're happy. Those trolls just couldn't understand how she didn't realize her roommates had been slaughtered. But when you read her statement, you find out just how little the survivors, the friends, the kids who came over that next morning, just how little they really knew about what had happened inside. Let me read you this, quote, "She advised she initially stayed. Wait, let me start again. She advised she initially went upstairs from, and this is redacted, but we know it's Bethany's bedroom, with redacted, we think that's Hunter Johnson. And she advised when she saw Xana, she realized Xana had not moved since she saw her earlier. She was still thinking Xana was still passed out from being drunk." So think about this. Dylan saw Xana on the floor in her t-shirt and underwear down the hall at 4 o'clock in the morning after all the craziness, right? Sees her as she's running by her room and going down to Bethany's room and thinks, there's Xana, she's passed out drunk. But then 8 hours later, she sees her in the same position on the floor. But she still didn't think any more had happened than Xana passed out last night. Maybe she thought Xana's OD'd. This is serious. She doesn't realize how serious the situation really is. Then They say she advised they stayed in the house when the police arrived, and the police, were putting the crime scene tape up when they realized there'd been a crime. And when they saw the ambulance arrive and leave, like literally they didn't even know there'd been a crime until they see the police putting the crime scene tape up and they see the ambulance come and go. Redacted told them that they would not leave unless there was no reason to stay.
So this is a hard thing really to understand for many people, that Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk didn't really understand what had happened, what had occurred, and didn't call the police till noon the next day. And as you heard Ashley Banfield say, they both took a beating, on social media and stuff. You may say that's not important, but to a 19-year-old girl, that's torturous. That's horrific. Phil.
Yeah, I think the right word is harassment. They were probably, in a world of social media today with young kids, if somebody says one bad thing about you, it just flows around the internet and it multiplies. So there was definitely a campaign of harassment against this poor young kid. And I think what we're getting now is we're getting a picture of these are young kids that have, not been exposed to any type of violence in their life. I mean, probably the most violence they ever saw was maybe a bar fight. And now she's trying to process that her friend has not moved in 8 hours. And the shock of it is starting to hit her when the ambulance shows up and the ambulance leaves without administering any first aid. Now police are putting up crime scene and it's starting to register in the mind that, something horrible has taken place. So being terrified in the middle of the night by the fact that there could have been someone in the house. She heard some screams. Is it, maybe a prank or something that's going on? Because we know when you see the police video of the inside of that location, obviously some partying's going on in there. So she's uncertain. And I'll tell you the truth. In the beginning, I had a hard time trying to figure out or absorb the fact that a murder had occurred at about 4:10 to 4:15 in the morning, and the police weren't called until lunchtime, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I had a hard time with that, and really, I struggled with it. But once you started to think about it, and then you hear the statements made by that young girl, and you see, as the police are walking in, what transpired in the house perhaps the night before, it all comes together and you can understand it. I think the conspiracy theories are going to run wild, but when you take it apart and you look at it, and from an inside the investigation view, the investigators at the time, they start to decipher it and they hear you can get a feel when a person's telling you the story, whether or not what they're telling you is believable. And you get a feel because you're in the location, you see it. So I don't think it was that hard in the beginning for the investigators to be able to rationalize the fact that the police weren't called for 8 hours. But, on the surface, news media, it says, well, the murder took place at 4 o'clock in the morning. Police weren't called till 8. It's definitely a big question in my mind.
Absolutely. Mike, your final thoughts.
Yeah, Bill, looking at what we've uncovered today, talking about Kohberger's home, looking at those crime scene, the videotape and everything else. The only thing I just want to remind people is always keep those 4 young, beautiful kids in your prayers, the Gonsalveses, the Chapins, the Canodals, and the Mogans, and those 4 beautiful people whose lives were extinguished. Prisoner 163214, don't ever even give that person a second thought. They deserve whatever they get. And so those kids are the center of this whole thing. They're the ones who we hope at least got a little bit of justice for what was done to them. So that's the most important thing.
100%. Phil, your final thoughts.
I just have to echo what Mike said. Thoughts and prayers for the family and the victims in this case, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle. May they rest in peace and may their families find some way to move forward with such a horrible tragedy that took place. We just try to go into this case and look, and perhaps maybe we can expose a red flag in another situation so that this never happens again. And I do not want to mention his name. I did mention it twice during the show, and I will refer to him for BK as much as I can. And obviously sometimes you forget you mention this animal's name, but I will try my best not to mention that lowlife's name again.
Absolutely. Folks, again, Our sponsor, FanDuel, is sponsoring the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. And we're very happy that they're doing that. Tomorrow night, opening night of the NFL season. So all you football fans, tomorrow night, the Philadelphia Eagles host the Dallas Cowboys. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope that was not a censorship that we got hit with where we wind up not streaming for a bit. Anyway, I want everyone to have a wonderful night. And again, thank you so much for tuning in to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. We'll see you next time. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.